from Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace, and we have a talk tonight from two friends of Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace who have just come back from Vietnam. And first we're going to just go over some events that are happening, and Leslie's going to do that, and I will introduce our speakers. So our speakers tonight are Teresa Meade and Andor Skotnes. Teresa is Florence B. Sherwood Professor of History and Culture at Union College, where she teaches Latin American, Caribbean history, gender, sexuality, and women's studies, and a course on inequality and socialism. She is the author of several books and many articles in the history of Latin America, Brazil, U.S. imperialism in Cuba, Central America, and the Caribbean. She is on the editorial collect, I'm not sure if I got that, Radical History Review, former president of the Journal of Women's History, and participant in Historians for Peace and Democracy. Andor has been a professor of history at Sage Colleges in Troy and in Albany for nearly 30 years. He teaches and writes on recent U.S. social and cultural history, especially African American and working class struggles. He also teaches Native American history, 30s and 60s in the U.S., oral history, and South African history. He's on the executive committee of Historians for Peace and Democracy and the editorial collective of Radical History Review. I'm going to let them choose their order, conduct the sessions, and at the end, when they finish, they can call on people for questions and discussion. So, Andor and Teresa.
Okay, I'm going to start, and thank you very much for coming. I'm really pleased to see so many familiar faces. The way we're going to do this is that I'm going to talk just for a few minutes at the beginning about what we were there in Vietnam for, about the course and the students and what we did. And then I'll turn it over to Andor, and he has a lot of slides. And he has several thousand slides.
So I hope you didn't. Oh, really? You guys didn't get babysitters?
So he has been winnowing them down. That's good. And he's going to give you some pictures about and talk about Vietnam today, really, and what we found. The course that we were doing, and so we were there with 16 students, most of them sophomores, most of them juniors, I think, in college, and 8 of them came from Union College and 8 from Hobart and William Smith. It's a joint program that Union runs to several parts, term abroad that Union runs to various parts of the world. As the professor and I'm in history, so I picked whatever the course was, and the students get a credit then for that. And so I, from the very beginning when I decided to do this, kind of felt that it was important to have Andor do it with me because it is, as it turns out, a lot of work. It's quite a bit. More than many places that we send terms abroad. The other places on this particular consortium go to Ireland, they go to Australia, Brazil, and in each one of those places they are much more involved with an institution. And the kind of pluses and minuses of the term in Vietnam is that we were there pretty much us and the students, and we had one coordinator. So we got to know Vietnam quite well, but for managing things, and it was a real much different because I had never been on a study abroad with students at a place that I did not know any of the language. Couldn't read it, didn't know it, couldn't understand it. took some language classes. It's a difficult language to pick up for very quickly. It's a tonal language. You could be saying, I'd like to have roast beef, or may I please borrow your cow? And, you know, because of the way in which you say the tones. So it was kind of a challenge there. The thing about Vietnam today is that very large numbers of people speak English, and we are also, and this is one of the things our students would say often, it's so amazing because they are so welcoming to us. And for the students who are between the ages of 20, 21 years old, college students, this is something that's very nice. Vietnam is quite welcoming to them. For our generation, it is something a little more miraculous because we're saying, oh my God, they like us so much, and we destroyed their country, and large parts of it. So this is one of the contradictions that you find with traveling with a younger group. I just wanted to ask Vinny, how many people have been to Vietnam? Okay, so great. So we'll have a lot of contribution on what you think about it. So our course the course that I taught was called the Director's Seminar, and it was called Two Cities in War and Post-War, Public History of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. Ho Chi Minh City is the name for what used to be Saigon, although it is very widely called Saigon yet to this day. And this was kind of interesting for us, but it was also of importance for explaining the history of Vietnam because of the nature of the division between the North and South. And so during this semester, we looked at the way in which the environment of Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City, had so transformed since 1975, and that Hanoi, which was the old French city and maintains a lot more of the colonial flavor to it. It didn't suffer the effects of the war quite as much, but it was bombed, as we know, extensively. But a lot of the city is still rebuilt into this French, with the French colonial flavor. So in looking at the two cities, you really do look at Vietnam in its modern history. The second thing that the students did is they took an internship, and they had a credit for that. And that was kind of interesting too, because all these internships were where they worked someplace in Hanoi. And those were in one case for and one of the reasons that these institutions or the places that they worked wanted the students for the internship was precisely to work in English. That is, to teach their employees, restaurant waiters, interpret websites, whatever. The cachet, the only thing our students had to offer, except they had some other skills, was that they spoke English. And they could teach English, and they could tutor people in English. And that is also, I think, says a great deal about Vietnam. The students worked in one case in a restaurant where a lot of the people come from the indigenous minorities from the north or from outside of the city of Hanoi. And that is an indicator of something new that we all learned about Vietnam is the importance of the 52 national minorities. That has been very much erased. People think of Vietnam in terms of the Viet culture. And so this internship, as well as, in various internships, students were constantly introduced to this fact that there were many national minorities in Vietnam. And that Vietnam's history is not, the narrative of Vietnam is that they repel the outsider, the Chinese, the Americans, the French, these outsiders who were always invading. But the real history, going far back, is that the Viet themselves were invaders and outsiders that colonized the country. So, everything kind of goes further back. They are very much aware of their history, though, in a way that, and the thousands of years of history in a way that is always quite foreign to all of us and to students. So the internships themselves help them. The other thing that the students did, and I just wanted to bring this up, is that they had buddies. They were called a buddy system. And so there were Vietnamese students, university students, who took them out to clubs, or they went for karaoke, or they had various field trips. And you would think, as I was reading the whole program, well, that will be very good. They'll learn a lot about Vietnam and its culture, and from these buddies. And they did. However, it was important to keep in mind that the majority of people in Vietnam are born since the end of the war. So even the parents of these young people who are university students do not have a sense of the war, and their experience of the war is that period afterward of the starvation, the terrible, horrible starvation after and between the time when Vietnam is isolated, they're at war, they fight the next war with China, that then there's this other period of time, and that's really their experience. So for us, in our generation going over, it's Vietnam, and interestingly for Americans, as you know, authors have pointed out, just the word Vietnam means the war. It doesn't mean the country. It means the war. And then we have the Vietnam War, which they call the American War. And so this was very interesting. And then for this young people, their knowledge of the Vietnam War was about as extensive as our own students' knowledge of the Vietnam War. It was not very deep. It was a long time ago. They're quite weak about that kind of history, and for us that seemed that was the big difference, I think, between Andor and me and people of our generation and the students that we were with. When we say Da Nang, it means where the troops landed to go into the war in Vietnam. If you say Da Nang now in Vietnam, or to our students, it's a great beach. And it is a nice beach. And the hotel development is all these huge Chinese hotels. So it's a very different thing. We say Way is that long battle that went on forever, it seemed, that the war comes to an end. For them, Way is a really good club scene. It's got a lot of bars, it's got, kind of a very lively night scene. And so the words are, the city had been developed, there's been a different development. So I guess I would say that that's sort of what it was about. The other thing was that the students took a language, they took Vietnamese language. That was important for their understanding of some cultural things. I don't think that over the course of, even the semester that they learned very much about that. And then probably one of the areas, the fourth course, which we called History and Culture, and that was a series of speakers, Vietnamese mostly, and some Western American who were long time in Vietnam, who came in and talked about various aspects. The history, maybe colonization, the environment, current challenges, the government, which was very fascinating. What does it mean to have, a communist party that's the government, but every place you go you think it's capitalism on steroids. It's just so incredibly market-oriented. So those speakers were very important to us too. And then just the final thing, and I'll finish here, and Andor will take it over. Oh, what happened to our?
Just got it.
Yeah, the map. I guess it disappeared. Okay, and I just wanted to say that this is the map. We landed in Saigon. We stayed there for about a month. Students really liked Saigon a lot. It seemed lively, young, lots of club scenes, very Western, very, they fit right in to the scene there. Then we took a trip down through the Mekong Delta here And we traveled on a boat, and then we eventually ended up in this city, Kanto, and from there we flew to Da Nang, which is up there, right south of Hue. We were there for a while. We traveled from Da Nang, and we went to Hoi An, which is an old city there, very beautiful old colonial city. Then we went to My Lai. We went to areas of the Chan ruins. I'm wearing my old Chan headband as my concession to the important indigenous group. We then traveled up to Hue and the old imperial capital. Really interesting, you know, I've read about it, I've read novels about it. Hue was just this romantic old imperial capital on the Perfume River. It's really a very vital club scene now. I mean, very young, lots of indications of young people, but young people with lots of money, disposable income, and that is probably one of the biggest changes. And from there we flew to Hanoi. No, we took a train to Hanoi. Where's the train, my love? We took a train to Hanoi, and then we were in Hanoi, and that's up there. And during our time, the rest of all of October, November, and December, we were in Hanoi, a part of December. And from there, we did travel to some other places. The Halong Bay, which is, you know, up there, the beautiful kind of the bay that with all the mountains that is on all the tourist posters. And we went up to the border there by Khao Bang. We went to an area of Sapa, which I don't see, there it is. It's divided into two words, Sapa. And then over the Thanksgiving break, the students all were free. They went to many different places. Some went to Laos, some went to Singapore, some went to, you know, different parts of Vietnam on their vacation. And Andor and I went to Dien Bien Phu, which is right there on the border at the very top. And that was quite interesting, the place where the Vietnamese defeated the French in 1954. And we were there as a couple of tourists, and most of the other tourists, I think, were French. It was one of the places where not very many Americans.
A lot of Koreans there, many
A lot of
Koreans.
Koreans all over the place.
Yeah. The main groups of, and so just to sum up, one of the things I felt that was kind of interesting about being in Vietnam was to be in Asia and to have almost the entire, your reference points were always the biggest investors are South Korean, Japanese, Chinese. What's the concern about Trump? Trump seems like kind of an unpleasant person, but, you know, he's not bombing us or anything, and maybe things are working out a little better with the you know, staving the Chinese. The main concern in terms of any kind of future big power problem is always China. And they have no friendliness for China at all, either the current Chinese or Chinese historically and everything. It's just lots of gross stereotypes about the Chinese in a market. Somebody told me to watch my pocketbook. A woman told me to watch your pocketbook. The Chinese tourists come here and they steal from you. And the Chinese will do this, the Chinese will do that. You know, there's always the Chinese are going to do bad things. So that was, it was nice to be away from this country. I didn't know what was going on with all the mess around here, except when you picked up the paper, and that was it. Okay, so I'll stop there, and we'll go on with the rest of the slides.
Okay, hello people. Let me get used to the computer here. Okay. I just want to talk about Vietnam. I have very deep feelings about Vietnam. I feel a lot of allegiance toward Vietnam. I do not speak Vietnamese, but Vietnam has been a very important part of my life, as possibly for many of you, since I was a very young person, because of the war, and because of the resistance to the war, and because of what the resistance to the war taught me about life. While we were in Vietnam this last time, I was reading an author on the screen there, Viet Thanh Nguyen, who I'd read before. He wrote The Sympathizer.
The sympathizer.
Sympathizer, which was Fluid Supplies. He got a MacArthur and so forth. He was Vietnamese born. He was part of the refugees when he was a little man. His family came over. His family was South Vietnamese. And he has developed into a major, really interesting, impacting intellectual in a number of ways in terms of the field of memory, in terms of ethnicity, and in terms of politics. If you want to check him, a good place to check him is he did a Democracy Now! With Ariel Dorfman. And he was terrific. He was just terrific. So anyway, I read more of him. Teresa did too. Teresa's very much into him as well. And he wrote something that sort of had resonance with me. He was talking about himself, and what he wrote is that he felt like he was the inheritor of two revolutions. And then he added two revolutions that did not or have not met their potential. And he was talking, in his case, he's an American now, he's been a refugee here, he sees himself as an American. In his case, he's talking about the American Revolution and the Vietnamese Revolution. So there's this interesting hit on Vietnam in particular. And I have a totally different background than him. I'm absolutely not Vietnamese. The American Revolution was important to me when I was a young man, especially in the first stages of SDS and participatory democracy, Tom Paine and what. But for me, the Vietnamese Revolution was extremely important in forming me as a political person. The Vietnamese Revolution, along with the Black Liberation Movement, together radicalized me and drove me toward socialist ideologies. And I felt very, very deeply about the Vietnamese Revolution. I remember being beside myself during the Christmas bombing of '72. I remember doing, as a college student, propaganda work around the horrors of the American and South Vietnamese forces. It's been a real deep thing for me. And I found that that was consolidated for me 20 years ago when I went to Vietnam for the first time with Steve Levon, Ed Tick, and a group of people, including 4 vets, 3 of whom were anti-war vets in the end. And I loved the place. I just really loved the place. I loved the way people reacted. I loved what I saw. And so I was very pleased to be able to go back when Teresa got this appointment. I was able to join it. And I would have to say the trip was on a very personal level. I enjoyed working with the students. I enjoyed being a faculty person. So on a very personal level, it was very, very moving. So what I decided to do, and we're already running out of time, decided to do with this little bit of a speech is I wanted to take it from the angle of my personal trip there. That doesn't mean I don't want to be political, but what I don't want to do is set out an analysis, which in fact I'm not sure I can legitimately do. I got ideas. But I wanted to do it in terms of what I felt very strongly. And one of the things is I drive Teresa and the kids, not except for Darren, he does the same thing as me. I shoot pictures all the time. And I shoot a lot of pictures in general. And that's given me a set of notes about what happened that's just relative. So I wanted to use some of the pictures. So I just want to give some impressions of my trip in Vietnam and some things I found important and some things that have political ramifications. And I better get to them or we'll get any of them in. So I'm gonna...
Could you show them the students?
Oh, you didn't do that?
No, I didn't.
Okay, excuse me. Here's our students, without me, because I'm taking the photo, as often the case. That's our students hanging in the, what's it, Kennedy?
That was okay, okay.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things that were of importance. We had one student who is Vietnamese, from Union, and she was adopted. She's from Syracuse, and she had a lot of interest in understanding Vietnam. She spoke no Vietnamese. She had never had much culture of Vietnam, anything. And she went back to her orphanage. And she'd been there once before, but she went back to her orphanage again, where they did remember her. That was, and other students went with her, and that was quite an important moving event. The other thing is there's a guy, where's Tyler? I can't see. Well, right there's Tyler. He is his parents were boat people, And he grew up,
Mother.
his mother,
His
yeah, I'm sorry, he grew up in Sacramento, and he never heard anything good about, you know, the Vietnamese communists and a lot of things. He grew up in the South, or his parents grew up in the South, and his mother did, and his father was Chinese, American,
And he was American.
and they met in California. And he was from Sacramento. So he spoke a little bit of Vietnamese, but his main knowledge of Vietnam was the food. And he was a real authority on the food, and he was very excited about the food because it was all the food that his mother made. So that was, I think, it was interesting to have two students that were kind of investigating their own roots there.
Tyler's grandfather was a major, I believe, in the Army of Vietnam, the South Vietnamese. And after liberation, he ended up in a re-education camp for a number of years, and then he got out and the family left. Here's the weird thing, since we've gone off on this tangent. Here's the weird thing. His grandparents really wanted him to go to Vietnam. Now, he's got families in Saigon, but they were really interested in him going to the north, where they hadn't been till since they were children. And they were really open about it, even though they were deeply committed to the South Vietnamese regime. So, you know, stuff is interesting, right? Okay, let me go back to where I was.
One thing I think that we would say, just go ahead and set it up, is that people in Vietnam, I think, have set aside the animosity between the North and the South, or that whole war, better than the United States has.
Okay, Tia, let me go now, okay?
Okay.
You know, I'm sort of trying to find my place in this. All right, so. What I want to do is talk about some historical sites. One of the things people have been, probably know this, is especially for somebody who's interested from the outside, and I think for many Vietnamese people too, there are many historical monuments, historical museums, historical sites, history to the distant past, but especially history in terms of the era of liberation and the struggle for liberation. And I loved it. You know, the famous sites, the War Remnants Museum in Saigon, Ho Chi Minh City, the My Lai site, which is the second time I've been there, was profound, as you know. It was the War Museum in Hanoi, etc., etc. So the mausoleum, Ho Chi Minh's mausoleum, is a really interesting place. Darren and I share a distinction that few people do. We went and visited Uncle Ho twice in the same damn morning.
This was because going through security at the place, we have to go through we tried to find the museum, and we asked a lot of people on the street, and they said, oh, it was outside, but then only optional to go through security, the only thing was it was mandatory to go to the mausoleum and the
Second time. Yeah, we wanted to go for the mausoleum. I had to get my pack back. And we wanted to go to the stilt house that Ho lived in for the last 10 years of his life. And we got out on the street. And the only way we could get back in to see it is go through again. So it was good. It was good. Whatever. So
He hadn't changed.
we really got to know Ho. Okay, so there's a bunch of stuff. I want to show two things, and they're in Hanoi, that I think were particularly moving because they were surprising. And because they are off the beaten track, but they're hardly unknown. Number one is a place called Building D9. Anybody know it? Okay, that's the Citadel. Citadel is the location of the emperor from about 1000 Common Era to about 1800 Common Era. It was the center of the early empire, and it ultimately, with the unification of what becomes Vietnam, was the center of Vietnam and Viet. And then they moved. Nguyen Dynasty moved on down the way, abandoned the Citadel. The Citadel became a local outpost for regional management. It deteriorated awfully. The French came in, busted the place up, and then when they set up the Indo-Chinese Federation, they built their French buildings in the Citadel. So the Citadel is not just destroyed this way, but the Citadel is kind of interesting because generations of history there. But that's the South Gate, which has been restored. Going inside it, this is French stuff. The French built and restoring this too. And the French used it as the central headquarters. And Whoops. And there's lots of French buildings. Folks like French buildings to take fashion shots in Cotai. And there's also a very nice dig there. They're doing a very serious dig of, I think, 11 acres, which you can see some of. And this is the place that I was not expecting. This is building D7.
D7?
D7, yes. What building D7 was, it was the headquarters of the party and the military forces from 1967 to 1975 in Hanoi. It's where the leadership met, where leadership conducted business, and it was a critical place. And it's really kind of strange when you do this. This was the nerve center of the liberation movement and the war. Now, why are they sitting there? Well, because they're getting intermittently and then more than intermittently bombed. So they set this up in the middle of the Citadel grounds. It looks sort of like a slightly oversized Southern California ranch house or something. But it's got, well, I've got it back here. This, you can see it. It's this low, apparently one-story building. And you go inside, and here is where the very elite was the party leadership, party government leadership, party state leadership, and the military leadership often met. And they have the different names out. You have Les Zwan, you have, of course, Lo Nguyen Giap, and others. This was the nerve center of the struggle. There's a picture here with Les Zwan, who was the head of the party, running a meeting in 1975 and planning the liberation of the South after the U.S. had pretty much left. So this is kind of an incredible place. This was a real nerve center of the struggle. Whatever you think of the struggle, this was an important place. And you can walk around in there. There are offices for Giap, there are offices for other people. But the big thing about this is there's a bunker underneath, and obviously they want a bunker because they have it, the hell bombed out. And the bunker goes down 9 meters, and you go down the stairs on 2 levels, and you come out and they've tiled the floor real nicely. And this is the alternative meeting space that was used during intense bombings, such as the Christmas bombings in '72. And you see Ho's up on the wall. By this time, Ho's passed away. And it's really kind of striking, and they put up some old maps and so forth. One of the rather striking things is this right here, which evidently is historical. They had a thermos for coffee with kitty cats on it. But this is a really amazing building. There's 3 exits and entry. They go out a ways within the Citadel, and there's other stuff that is interesting. But I thought that was really terrific. I had no expectation to be at the nerve center of the revolutionary struggle at that point. And just as a little icing on the cake, you come up, and this is the Citadel Tower, 2 centuries old. You probably won't have seen it in different places. Looks sort of like the Citadel Tower in a way, too, but it's not Citadel. And then, of course, one of my favorite places, across the street, across, of all things, Dien Bien Phu Street, you walk over to Lenin Park. There's that. And you got folks frolicking in Lenin Park.
It's a real good skateboard place.
A lot of skateboarders, folks playing gambling games in the back. So anyway, but that's the sort of thing that I really liked about being in Vietnam. It's not, I really did like to go to see the mausoleum, the Ho Chi Minh Museum, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is really terrific stuff. But I really liked finding something like this. Let me show you another one that you may or may not know about it. I'm putting this up here in the next folder. Hugh Tiet Lake. Ever heard of Hugh Tiet Lake? Beyond. Maybe we're not going to hear about it. There it is. This is Hugh Tiet Lake. This is about 2 kilometers west of where we just were in the Citadel, in residential areas in Hanoi. In fact, I'll show you a picture of Darren in a second, in a really dense area that you have to go through these little tunnel-like streets to get to. And that is the area. Now, what do you think that is? Well, this is the marker. It's not the thing itself. That's the thing itself. This is also known as B-52 Lake. And this is remains of the B-52, was shot down during the Christmas bombing, 1972, and here's the plaque right here. And this is a lived-in, this is actually, despite the fact that it's really crowded in this dense house, this is a pretty affluent kind of neighborhood. But there's the story. At 2305 on December 27th, 1972, the battalion number 72, Air Defense Missile Regiment, number 285, shot down on the spot a B-52G of the U.S. imperialists, violating Hanoi airspace. Part of the wreckage fell in Phuket, in Lake Engok Province, Ba Dinh District, Hanoi. And of course, they called the Christmas bombing Dien Bien Phu in the air because they shot down so many B-52s. And they considered it a little propagandistic, but they considered it. But I thought this was just a terrific place to see. Darren and I went back, I went there earlier, we went back, and we spent some time looking at it. It's also real interesting because these are little lakes. They're in the middle of residential areas in Hanoi. Hanoi has many, many lakes. 60-odd lakes originally. About half of them, I believe, were filled in the French period. But there's still these little pocket lakes. To get there, you've got to walk by another lake. But this is B-52 Lake. Now, I have no idea what part of the B-52 that is. And here we are just outside the lake, and naturally they have a cafe called B-52. But this gives you a sense, in fact, it doesn't so well give you a sense of it. But that's actually a kind of a wider spot in the street where we had to walk in. We walked down there, we took a right, went by another lake, walked around. It's really, really condensed. It's a very interesting place. But I think, for me, it's a really heroic place. So those are some of the examples, some of the things in the built environment of Hanoi I like a great deal. Some of the things that politically give me a sense of hope, because there's evidence that, in fact, there in the built environment are memorials, are museums, are locations and so on to commemorate and to tell the story of the revolution and the national liberation movement. And it's not just tourists who go to them. Now, this is part of a dialogue. We'll see where it goes. We'll see how it affects the direction of people. We'll see how many young people are affected by it. But it's there, and it's material evidence of the continuing ideological struggle around liberation. Okay, so that's one thing I want to show. I'm probably way the hell into this one. Okay. Whoa, where's that?
Bethlehem Neighbors for Peace website.
Oh, okay. Well, this is really good. Now I can't find where I am. Sorry again?
Said we have a branch in Hanoi.
Oh, really? Yeah, Peace, yeah, no, that's, well, I would have.
Right there, BMP slideshow.
I would have joined if I knew. Okay. All right, so I want to shift it a little bit. In the environment, the walk-around environment, the built environment stuff you see evidence of all sorts of things. We all know Vietnam has been remarkably prosperous in developing for a while, and if you didn't know it, it's true. Like since 1986 with reforms called Doi Moi, which loosened things up and began using capitalist methods to attempt, and from the point of view of the party, to attempt to build the infrastructure to allow a transition to socialism, the economy has done very, very well. And in fact, from about 2000 to the present, it's averaged 7% growth in the domestic GDP, yes. And all the indices have risen. Poverty has, well, that's not true. All the indices have gotten better. Poverty has dumped down, wages have gone up. But of course, it's a little bit uneven. Because when you apply capitalist methods, you get capitalist results in part. And income distribution has widened. But nonetheless, there's a prosperity. And so, I thought I'd try and represent the way that you sort of feel this prosperity. I need an assistant here. What the hell am I? This one? Yes. And one of the ways is to look at the built environment of the cities. If you don't know Vietnam at all, you'll be surprised how developed the cities are. Now, they're uneven. And there's poor areas and rich areas. And actually, the penetration of poor appearing stuff and stuff that's new and richer is really, especially I think in Hanoi, is really quite remarkable. But that's out our window in Ho Chi Minh City. Toward the center, that actually right down below us is the U.S. consulate. Didn't know it until later. But you know, this is pretty nice looking city, but that doesn't tell the kind of story of the prosperity that does. This is a building a few blocks away. I've forgotten what it was. I wrote it down somewhere. But you know, this is a modern, quite interesting architectural building. What do you think? Some 20 stories or something? But that doesn't tell the story. This one does better. Now you get my notes out. Okay, this is Viet Cong Bank Tower. Note, Bank Tower. Viet Cong Bank Tower. This is a big building. From another angle, that's it. It's a big building. It is 40 stories high. It was built somewhere around the late 2010. So I don't have that written down. This is certainly the symbol of something, right? But it's not the symbol of something like that is. That is the landmark 81. It's called 81 because it's 81 stories. It's the tallest building in Southeast Asia. It's built by the Vin Group, by, in particular, Vin Homes, the country's largest real estate firm. But there's more. That's another shot of it at night. These are not my photos, obviously. They're highly but it's not just Ho Chi Minh City, which is the more prosperous, the commercial center and so on. People overstate that because in terms of production and commerce and so on, the area around Hanoi is quite remarkably developed, and that's represented in the big building sphere by, oh no, I'm sorry, my mistake, we're still in Hanoi. This is my favorite building.
No, this is Saigon.
I mean, it's Ho Chi Minh City, yes, that's right. This is my favorite building because it's so silly.
I always thought that was a helicopter pad.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I call it the helicopter crash building. Not the helicopter, this flying saucer crash building. This was for a while the biggest, it's a little bit older than the one we just looked at, 81. This was for a while the tallest building in Southeast Asia until a place in Hanoi overtook it. But this is the Vitexa Financial Tower, 68 stories, but it's state-owned.
What state?
State-owned enterprise, yes. Yeah, enterprise. Who knows? Okay, let me just point some more to you because they're kind of a giggle. This is down in Hanoi. This is the Lotte Center, 2014. It's got 65 floors, so it's a little bit of sort of second ranker, right? There it goes again. Now this is another Vin Homes development. This is Landmark 72. It was Landmark 81 in Ho Chi Minh City. This is Landmark 72. Why did they call it that? It's 72 stories. It's really, really big. Plus it has the extra of, let me find my notes here, 2 48-story hotel twin towers by, to see it right. This is evidence of something in terms of development. Okay, now we're back in Ho Chi Minh City. This is Landmark 81. And what I want to point out, around Landmark, Vin Homes, this group, these real estate tycoons, have built a bunch of high-rise residences. And as far as I know, they're pretty much full. That's evidence of something. That's evidence of either an upper middle class or even a wealthy group of people in Vietnam who can afford places like that. And that's a lot. There's a lot of places there. But let's hop back to Hanoi. And this is driving down the street after crossing the Red River. And what you see looming there, and I have checked, this is Vin Homes again. Times Center development. And let me show you some more of that. There it is. It's out the window of our friend, the artist. And you've got these massive development sort of hunkering down on the old city, or if you go over to the other side here, they come from the other side. These are incredible developments, right? And they are symptomatic of a certain kind of prosperity, certainly the accumulation of a great deal of capital. They're probably evidence of real estate speculation, and they're evidence of class formation of a very specific sort. The Vietnamese is a Vietnamese group, the Vinh group of the Vietnamese group. So you see this sort of thing, and you see the old stuff as well. And I also want to include this. This is not Hanoi or Saigon. This is Da Nang. Da Nang wants to be Rio. Look at that. There's Teresa wishing it was Rio. Because Teresa wants Rio. This is insignificant. Da Nang is a real center.
This is a lot of Chinese development
May
and
well
South
be.
Korean.
Yeah, Chinese and Korean capital are into all of this. There's a lot of foreign capital we put in all of this. Not so much U.S.
Japan is the largest.
No.
South Korea, Japan.
I just included these because I thought they were a giggle. This is coming over just off the bridge over the Red River going into Hanoi. This is after we picked Aaron up at the airport. And they got these damn buildings lit up. What a thing. But this is the one I got a lousy picture. This is the one that's a real trip. You see these buildings? That moves. The Vietnamese flag moves across. The red and yellow star moves across.
Grab the neon sign, it's just like, it's a little different, it had more of a that thing, you probably see sometimes in New York City.
Well, but yeah, I don't think I've seen this in the U.S. We saw it in Cambodia as well. These buildings are lit up. I said, it has to be some projection system, I guess, unless there are LEDs on the building. And you have these big sort of moving objects on them. Anyway, evidence of something in terms of building life. And we're now back in Da Nang, and Teresa wanted to show her support for those repelling the American invaders who landed on the beach in
It's
Denver
a stage.
in 1965. What? And
Our
she-
students were very excited about this thing because we went here and they all went into the water.
They weren't really excited about Teresa.
They,
They should have been, but you know.
they would get into that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah, they would. Because we were so.
Same thing would happen in Cuba. They would get all militants and, get the paraphernalia and their fists in the air and, they're all working banks.
Aaron was running around Hanoi wearing one of those T-shirts that they sell everywhere. Remember that? The red shirt with the big yellow star. You go, no, he was running around Cambodia doing it. And these people were Vietnam. They were not pleased seeing the Vietnamese flag being worn around in Phnom Penh.
It was great, I got that. By the way, I got as a Christmas present because we came back from Vietnam, Cambodia, we came back here a week for Christmas.
That's right.
So it was,
And there we were all in
We better
See it
move the
read.
houses.
Okay, we're running a little late. I should move on, or
Yeah,
should I
houses.
quit?
Houses.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, I was going to do that. Okay, so what I wanted to do after that, so we've looked a little bit at buildings and residences, and I wanted to look at something else that's interesting historically in terms of Vietnamese culture, and I think says something about the nature of Vietnamese culture. And I wanted to look at self-built houses, improvised houses, which are, is prolific the right word? All over the damn place. And they're really interesting. Now I saw these houses. I always thought that houses, especially in Hanoi, were kind of weird, these kind of houses. But I didn't have any background. And we learned about these from a guy who became our friend, who will come up here in a second if this cooperates. Yes. Wen Pei Song. Wen Pei Song is an artist, he's a professor, and he's also in a really thorough way a historian, an interesting historian. He's actually becoming a rather important artist in Vietnam. And this is him in his studio. We visited him and we talked with him. And he spoke to our students and he gave us a tour in the old district with murals and so on. And I learned some stuff from him. And one of the things, if you can see his stuff in the background, I'll talk more about that in a second, is he was really into these old houses that had been renovated by the people who live in them, that had been reconstructed, built on, sometimes by hiring people, sometimes by doing it themselves, over generations, under different conditions of Vietnamese history. from World War II to the French War, and we're talking about the North now, it's mainly Hanoi, but it exists in Saigon as well, to the period of first construction under the Democratic Republic, to the period after unification, where, as Teresa said, things became very difficult under the impact of the war with Cambodia, and then the Chinese attack from the north, until they backed off the state socialist policies. But he says, you can look at these houses and you could read that history in, because people were coping with, and we're talking about working people of different sorts, coping with and creating housing for themselves. They got cut loose after the DRB came in to collectivize housing and to take it away from the rich folks. And then it went on and on. So this is not one of those. This is a cheesy picture I pulled down off the web of Wan Kien Lake, because I couldn't find mine today when I finally decided to do this. And I put this here because this is sort of the heart of Hanoi. It's the mythic lake. It's the lake with the returned sword. It's nice. We live about 6 blocks south from it. It's nice, but it suffers, because you will notice that from this picture, this is the ancient pagoda that sits in the middle of it, but all around, it's built. It's built. This is from the air. You can get a sense. It's Wan Kien Lake, and you can see a lot of the built environment of Hanoi from this. But you'll see around the edge of the lake, it's pretty built in the building. And what's the new hotel they're building?
Oh, it's Four Seasons.
Yeah, Four Seasons being built. And then off down the old stuff. But it still isn't the difference. In the north and the west of Wan Kien Lake are areas that have older housing. Housing that people have built and rebuilt over years. I just want to show you them and talk about what I think it means. And to do that, I forgot I had that one in there. Yeah, that's the, there's a whole myth around the pagoda there, which I can't tell right, so I won't. This back here is the equivalent of the City Hall of Hanoi, it's the People's Commission building. Okay, where to go? Somebody does this. Let's go out. That's because I have to go to my next door. See, I don't do that. Because it would take forever to build this whole car. Okay. Yes, that's right. So what I want to do, I want to show you some of these houses. And just as sort of an extra for the trip, I'm going to take you to Train Street in Hanoi. Ever heard of Train Street? Thank you, Teresa.
Train Street.
I know I'm not going to put it up for a long time. Train Street is the most amazing thing, because the main railroad line from the south, from Hue, comes into Hanoi largely on a, a viaduct, and then it dumps down onto the city street and comes right through an old residential neighborhood. Right through here.
You kind of think of Railroad Ave as an example, like the Railroad Ave in Colonnade.
If railroad Ave still had lines.
But it's a building.
So, there's Train Street. Back up here, it goes into a viaduct. It comes right down. These are older buildings, you can tell. It comes right down through here. The problem with Train Street recently, in recent years, I guess Instagram was responsible. They gave it responsibility. It got really publicized and it became really, really popular with the tourists, especially the backpacker. And so Train Street, as you can see the folks hanging, had a lot of Western tourists especially, who really loved to hang down there. And when the trains came through twice a day, our train came through there actually. We did train, we were. They loved to get out there and get next to the train, run in front of the train, stuff like this. And those authoritarian communists decided, in power, decided they didn't want a bunch of squashed tourists all over the road, and they closed the street.
The guy did get hit.
Yeah, they didn't much of the guy got hit with attack. And so that's what it is today. They open it up for people for it to go through. They don't let the tourists, they only let local residents in. It's a lighted street. It's a street all along. You can see the older housing along this. It's a street that has older housing, it has shops and so on. It was kind of a tourist center. The people who have those places are suffering now. But I didn't do it for that. I sort of like to tell a little story. But I wanted to show you the houses. This is a bit of a view of it. And you notice these houses are kind of peculiar. They're sort of built on things. They look a little warehousey right here. But If you go there, you got something going on. Isn't that a trip? That's the train line right there. And these are houses that have been built up, rebuilt, added on, changed over many, many years. They're essentially what they call tube houses, weird names they are. And there's a lot, and these long, thin Vietnamese houses. And this one has had some professional stuff on some of these. This is very likely very professional cement work. But these are examples of these improvised, self-built houses. These, weirdly enough, and I don't know if it's weird for Vietnamese people, they refer in English to these things as tiger cages. And I think there's no reference to the tiger cages of South Vietnam. These grids can be bought, and what people would do is they buy them, and they essentially fence in balconies, or they build out, and they build up on the top, and they would create spaces for themselves. And they take a house that housed a few people, and it ends up housing a whole lot of people. That's the whole thing that happens. But this is a kind of condensed area. You see these all over the place. You see them all over the city. They're particularly part of the headquarters and to the west of it. But you can see them all over the city. You see them in Ho Chi Minh City as well. And what our friend Tessam argues is that these are really important to look at and to think about, because these tell stories of people's adaptation to difficult times and people's initiative. And he says, in some way, he's sort of sad they're getting knocked down. And frankly, a lot of them probably aren't going to last very long for good reason. But he says, you know, what these are is crystallizations of history. And I think he's right. So let me show you a little bit more about this. Okay, this is still Train Street. This is where, somewhere there's the cop who's keeping the tourist types out. You can see this was a thriving, as is true of so many of these old places, thriving shops on the first level, or maybe not always thriving, but lots of shops on the first level. And again, this is still Train Street. See, this guy is making sure that I don't go up there and go on there, which I didn't try to do.
Two of our students had an internship in a cafe on Train Street. And one of the things that they were doing was they were working with the website and helping them build the website and communicate out through TripAdvisor and all different sorts of things, letting people know that Train Street was still open, that they could come down.
They have a museum there. They weren't right on Train Street. They were
they're
a block
in.
in.
Because when
In
the
and
city
out.
closed it down, then the TripAdvisor, a lot of these places, if you looked on it, they would say it was closed. And they wanted people to keep coming there. And so that was part of what they're doing.
Yeah, it's incredibly dangerous, and who knows what the authorities are going to do, because they essentially should get the train tracks out of there or up. And it's very hard for them to do, partly because of financial stuff. But it's really, really dangerous, you know? So, and you know, these backpacker types and stuff were having a heyday, you know, playing chicken with trains. Okay, here's some more of these. This isn't exactly on Train Street, but you can see the similar thing. The kind of what I'm going to call tube house, and explain it in a second, all rebuilt with tiger cages stuff built up on top, and so on. Lower floors changed into commercial areas.
And these tiger cages, in some cases, they aren't just like they put a grate so that they'd have a patio there and you could sit out. If you look up through their kitchens, their living rooms, there's activity. You're looking through those grates at people's houses and what was going on there.
Okay, so let me explain them a little bit. I'm not going to be too long. These are the origin of many of these houses. That's a tube house. That's one that's been restored in Hanoi. This is what many of the houses used to be in the old district there. Many of the houses in Hoi An are still similar to this, except if you know Hoi An is this really beautiful little city. Teresa mentioned it. But it has become so tourist overrun. It's astounding. And every house is selling clothes. You know, it looks quite affluent. So Hoi An, when I saw it 20 years ago, I really liked this. But this is a traditional tube house. It's called a tube house because it has a narrow front, and that had to do with various laws they had on taxation by the width of frontage. And they used to be two-story, and then they would build them up. But this is, you walk into, this is a restored, old 19th century tube house. And if you walk into it, you just see why it's a tube house, because I've just walked inside there, and you see it goes back and back and back. There's an area here, and I'm not going to deal with all this, that's open as a kind of plaza, patio, whatever. So that's the origin of these. But what occurred in various ways is they sort of became stuff like this. They got built up. These are particular types of buildings. This is actually, they're probably built newer. This really isn't so traditional by now. But that's what happened. In tube houses, they built them up. And this is a long time ago they started building them up. And so, what you see, and I'm going to sort it, and this is this, I think I'm done with that.
Some of these houses probably today have multi-families in them.
Oh, yeah.
So they might have a house and then they'll build another part up and that will be part of the family.
Exactly.
So a huge family, number of the extended family or something.
Okay, so here's some. These are what we could call tube houses. This happens to be in Huntington City. These are really beautifully redeveloped, or they might some of them be neo-tubes, because there's this architectural style of neo-tubes where they build them from scratch as tube houses. But it gives you a sense of the environment. It also gives you a sense of something that our friend told us, and that is, you know, before the reforms of '86, there were shops on the first floor, but there weren't all that many. In fact, there were less as time went on, until they opened up, and then it opened wide, and they stuck advertising over everything. So these places that were fairly new and stuff, all of a sudden they all look like Tokyo or something. And you see it here, you know, the advertising. This is pretty regular. Now, what they did, this self-built housing built on different backgrounds. This here, these are not tube houses. They sort of look like it, that's the way they built it. But these are social houses. These were built during the Soviet period on Soviet designs. And what they were these bigger apartment buildings that supposedly were social and communal. They had communal areas and so forth. There's a bunch of them around. I'm pretty sure this is one of them. But you see, they've changed it in many, many ways. With the tiger cages around, and they often they're putting foliage on it. This is a tradition of remaking your environment yourself.
Good run of electric.
Andor, go back and show that electrical grid.
Ah, yes. Is it there? I didn't know.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but that's an easy one. You know, you got them that look like. But what's interesting is you have these massive knots of wire someplace, and then you've got nothing. You've got only streets and no bloody wire. And that's because in both of these two cities, perhaps for Vietnam, they're putting all the electricity underground. And much of the electricity in Hanoi and in Saigon that we saw is underground. You see these big transformer units and so forth. But not there, as you can see. It adds to the charm of the place. So interesting, very often in these type pictures, they got clothes hanging. I don't know if they're for sale or not. And this is part of, you know, sort of mixed one. People stuck stuff up, it came down, it doesn't look so good. There's also, this is just a little ways from Wan Kim Lake. This is just right by the Vietnamese Women's Museum, which is terrific. Both the one in the south and the one in the north are terrific. The north is particularly good. And this is an old French colonial that folks have really built on. And this is on a major street. This is on, it's a street named after the woman who led the elephants. But look, you know, that's, this, no, that's not. And this is an AHA coffee. AHA coffee is all over the place. This coffee place is all over the place. Vietnam is #2 coffee producer in the world, thank the French. And coffee is loved. And cafes are for coffee, not for sandwiches, but for coffee. And they're all over. There's a string that had with Viet Cong feet. Anyway. So you see, look what they've done to this. Why it's never been painted, I don't know, but they've built on all over the place. And again, this is in a fairly affluent area. And just a few more. Now this is an interesting street, this is in the old quarter, but this street has not been terribly changed by build-ups. And these are old French colonial era. Remember the colonial era for France lasted until 1954. French colonial era buildings that have been commercialized and so on. There may be some minor modifications. They have stuff up here, but not like some of the other streets. This is interesting. You'll see this sort of thing. Here's a street that, you know, and you find they've been changed in all sorts of ways. And I have a picture that I didn't find to put in on one of these really old places. First floor has a really swanky shop that says sex. And I should have gotten it. But, you know, look, the upper story there is probably what was a grand old French colonial building. Some decrepitude probably still lived in. The lower, not so much. Sometimes you see the lower really shiny and new and with all sorts of obscene US.
You see, on the left there, that boutique hotel, that's a new,
This one.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
right.
what, you know, our friend who, you know, is very into the restoring of these, you know, he would like to see a lot of the old city restored, but instead, what's gonna happen is they're just gonna put up.
Yeah, and you see that all over. I mean, we were in a hotel that wasn't so new, but it was plumped right down in the head of the building that looked a lot like these. Right across the street, they had these French colonials that were little, you know, shops and so on. And it's very mixed. It's really interesting how mixed it is. But this is some of the most expensive real estate in Vietnam. The reason they're building Vinh Towers, Rudolph, more on the outskirts, is that land is too expensive in here. Plus, there's a lot of resistance to knocking the stuff down. In Hanoi, I don't know about what you can see. And just a couple more. This is a block. And you see things have been dealt differently. The old French colonial's still there. This one's been modified, et cetera, lots and lots of shops, many of them international. Some tiger caves there. I like this one particularly. I know at least of two of these. What you have there is an old shrine. And it's a shrine that's been there a long time. Look, the roof in the back has been replaced. And it's now sort of able to simulate. So a number of those. Self-built environment, adaptive environment. This is one of my favorite ones. This is an old manor house. It's up in the area near what's now Lennon Park. It's up near the Citadel. And it was once a very fancy French manor house. And I can even show you it because there it is. In the 1950s. Not very handsome. But you know, it's a kind of French colonial style that mixes all sorts of Vietnamese and Chinese stuff into it. I don't know the history, but it's very possible Vietnamese architects worked on this. So it's kind of syncretic French chronology. But what you can see, if you look at it, you can see, especially if we sort of flash over here, see there's a nice little fenceway, this little archway and so on. You can sense the whole building. Flash back here, and what you see is a really rebuilt, modified house in many ways. The tiger cage is up here. This has been sealed up on this balcony. It's kind of interesting balcony that it had. And you'll see the fence is apparently gone with all of these stores that are built, except it's not completely gone because that's the gate that we saw in that other picture. It's still there. These were built into the wall. So this is a real example of a self-built and rebuilt, improvised place. There was an artist community that lived there. We know that much about it. So, it's interesting, and it's especially interesting because they saw an artist friend did a piece on it. Oops, there it is. Tayson does photographic-based reliefs. And so this we actually built. This is about a yard.
The house, a picture.
The picture's more expensive than the house. But, you know, what he did was he sat in front of it, the picture I took from the side, took multiple pictures, and he then built relief out of them. Not full relief, but enough relief to suggest shadow and depth and so on. And he's very careful and methodical about his photograph, and he really loves these movies, like I said. He considers them beautiful, and he also considers them crystallization of Vietnamese history, and he considers them a kind of tribute to the ingenuity of people in difficult times. And I will show you one last one, and then we can negotiate on our future here. This is another one of Tayson's. Photo relief. Now look at that sucker. Can you believe they
It's
like
like
that?
on standstill. Then in like we have equipment, it's like we go, kind of the building, the entire building,
It's like standing there ready to fall.
Fall when it's,
Yeah.
when you go up, when you really,
Well, but you know, what you look at, this probably was French colonial, your build-outs there, and what they've driven is, whatever you call it, beams into or passing to the top, and they put this on top, and they put another one, and they built it way out here. And last time I showed this picture, people said, is that safe? I have no idea. I'm not sure what building codes they have for dramatically oversized overhangs.
I hope they don't have earthquakes around there.
Yeah, no, I don't know that, I mean, I guess
They
they
have
could.
typhoon.
This one, I mean, this one is serious. We thought about, we don't know where this house is. Well, he would probably have the address, we can go see it. But isn't that a trip? And I think that's the last of my houses. So, the decision we have to make is 8:15, perhaps my bedtime. But
We can schedule a 8:45 to leave them so they can close the library at 9.
okay, the last thing I want to do, this is one of my favorite little trips. I did this at Russell Sage College last week, and the students really dug it. I talked a little bit more than I have today about the importance of experiencing the built environment. I told them the built environment doesn't just mean buildings, it means anything human beings construct. Earthworks, whatever. And I said, one of the most imposing built environments for somebody, at least somebody like us from the outside, is actually a mobile built environment. It doesn't have to be sticky. And you know what that is, and if you've been in Vietnam, you probably know this.
Down the bottom.
Where? Oh, yes. Is that it? Yes, that's it. Here it is. Motorbikes. Everywhere. Lined up. Driving down the street. Packing the street. Packing the street more. And these are Grab drivers, by the way. Same as Uber. They have motorbikes and cars with Grab. And Grab, where's Grab based? Anybody know? Singapore, I think. Anyway, it drove Uber out of Vietnam. But motorbikes everywhere, all over the place. It's astounding. It becomes psychologically drenching. I get up in the morning and I go out to the window and I say, oh, Teresa, I see a motorbike. What are I seeing? About 500 motorbikes down the street. Motorbikes everywhere. And it's not just that they're out there on the street. They're also on the sidewalks. Look at them, parked on the sidewalk. And when people come out to eat or work on the sidewalk, they use the sidewalks. Sidewalks are used in many of these areas for all sorts of things. You can't find a place to walk. I would say sidewalks in some of these sections of Hanoi are for 1, motorbikes, 2, eating, 3, working, or whatever you're doing, sign painting, so. Number 4, maybe if you could find a pedestrian. I spend a lot of time walking the street, which has its own challenges. But you know, motorbikes bloody everywhere.
it was a challenge for me because in Vietnam there's hardly any right-of-way laws. Like his country, crossing the street, it's just one thing you have to look both ways several times.
Don't stop.
Times, and I got kind of nervous that trying to stop and keep going. I had to run because it just which you don't. My dad told me not to do. And it was
Yes,
just,
and you did it a couple of times. You don't run. On those streets that look anything like that, you walk out evenly, maybe indicate. You don't stop unless you really have to. You sure don't back up unless you just got to, and you damn well don't run. Because everybody is looking at you and checking where you're going to be and it's moving around you. It's a really interesting driving culture. But you've got to be pretty good at doing that. And then when you do it for a while, it gets to be fun, and that's when you probably can get run over because you're having a lot of fun out there. So anyway, and there's, you know, they park all over the place. I told you about Coffee Place. Look at all those folks in Highlands Coffee. And this is an illustration of where people will be eating on the street. Sometimes it's a food place that then expands out on the street. Sometimes it's a restaurant on the street. This is one that expanded on. And if you put them in there, and if there were a bunch of motorbikes, poor Teresa couldn't get through, you know?
they park there, and the sidewalks too, it's hard, like, you have to go out on the road because the sidewalks some places are filled with parked motorbikes.
But here's where it gets dicey. Not when they're parked, but when they're driving on the sidewalk. And it can happen all the time. Like, we're walking down, and all of a sudden these folks are zooming at us because the road is too filled. And here people, pedestrians and motorbikes are working together. This is rush hour. I believe it's in Saigon. And folks are making do. They improvise. Here you've got people getting off their motorbikes and walking with the folks walking. Teresa's getting real brave moving in there. Yeah, this is, it is really quite astounding. And then I included, this is the backpackers area in Saigon, this bizarre place. But they have a walking street, and guess who's walking on the walking street is a motorbike. Motorbike repair, they set up and have motorbike repairs. Some of the motorbike repairs are permanent, but all these stores work and use the sidewalk. And here's Teresa having a nice dinner in a sidewalk cafe, and look what's on the sidewalk. Motorbikes. So anyway, and I can stop there. I got the motorbikes driving through the markets, one of the more traditional markets. You go in, you watch for the damn motorbikes that come through. The motorbikes carrying all sorts of stuff. The one that maybe I'll quickly show you this. I had multiple riders. Oh, that's a trip. I got as many as 6 people on a motorbike, but I didn't find it. I got plenty of 5, usually some kids. But then I found this a refrigerator man from 1972. Counted. 7. So this is an older tradition. This is before helmet laws. They wear helmets pretty much, if you have noticed. The government decided that helmets had to come in because of injuries. They did a campaign. They gave a day, and magically most people started wearing helmets. Anyway, there's more. I got lots more. I got folks carrying all sorts of nonsense. I'll show you one that you can figure out what it is. What do you think that is?
Oh, wow.
Joy.
Isn't that a
Joy?
Is it? What is it? Choy?
Bok choy?
Maybe somebody knew. I thought, I don't know what it is. Okay, I got more of that. Oh, the cow. Well, this isn't the cow, these are pigs. They're not, that's pulling, so that's not exactly, that would have been fair if the pigs are on there with it, but, and you know, boxes, what's that? This is something covered completely over, but, and it's interesting for women and the kind of dress they wear on the countryside. And again, and this guy with, again, a pulley, moving galvanized. But there it is. That has some sort of cattle type.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of uncomfortable with that growth there. That's our friend like that. That's not
Okay.
Anyway, so it goes. Okay.
Just a couple of final things that I would point out that's obvious from these slides is that one of the major challenges that Vietnam is facing is the issue of sustainability. You're there, and I'm not sure many people realize, but Vietnam is one of the most populated countries of the world. It's the most populated country of Southeast Asia. Indonesia has 3.5% of the world's population. And after that, I mean, not counting Bangladesh or some parts of South Asia, but Vietnam is 1.3% of the world's population. It's a very, very densely populated country. And it is, combine that with the 7% growth rate, and when you talk to people, you say, well, how can this go on? There's no more room on the street for any more motorcycles. There are 94 million people and 45 million motorcycles.
49 million registered motorbikes.
Almost 100 million, I think.
But they're saying 96.
So half of that population is below the age where they could even drive a motorbike.
Right.
So
so that means that a lot of people have many. So that's a lot of pollution, and that is a major problem. The two major challenges, though, that Vietnam faces is one, the effects of climate change and the sea level rise. So the sea level rise in the Mekong Delta, and Vietnam is the second largest rice exporter in the world after Thailand. And it is salinating the water to such an extent and so fast that there is a potential for destroying the rice crop, which would be a catastrophe beyond all, imaginable. And when we were there and in the Mekong, and this is the Mekong Delta, you see it's been built up a great deal. And if you go to the next slide there, so there's a lot of commerce there. It's home to a lot of fisheries. I think there's another slide there, which is of the, you know that we get a lot of our fish and our seafood from this area. And so there's a potential disaster if the water keeps becoming as salinated as it is. And when we were there, I was talking to someone, he said, well, we thought we had 5 years in order to try to probably GMO a rice that can grow in more salty water, but it's coming too fast. So this is the problem of the entire part of the South Asia, as many of you know. It is by 2100, 200 million people will be displaced in this area of South Asia because of the rising water. The second thing, though, that is the major environmental problem in Vietnam is the legacy of the use of chemical defoliants. So the Agent Orange continues to cause birth defects. There are nearly 4.8 million people in Vietnam who are yet still affected by Agent Orange. We went to a number of places where you have big kind of like sheltered workshops, or they're places where people who have suffering disabilities and they sell things, and they make a lot of ceramics and lacquerware. In 2012, approximately 50 years after the war, the United States then began to, with a joint project, to help clean up some of the chemical storage areas. And it contributed $43 million to start this cleanup. The Vietnamese government, however, spends $431 million a year for monthly allowances and physical rehabilitation for people who are suffering the effects of Agent Orange. Both the generation, that generation that had the direct effects has died, and these are the birth effects in the future generations. So there is a lot of, there's a Japanese engineering group that has begun working with the Vietnamese in order to try to also take a lot of the contamination out of the soil because of the massive damage that had taken place there. The final thing that is a major problem is deforestation, and so there's a massive reforestation project. I think we were there, what was it, 1 million trees?
1 million trees, 1.5.
Plant 1 million trees in Hanoi. And so that, and then the other thing is the contamination of the groundwater. High levels of arsenic in the groundwater, and then finally UXOs, unexploded ordinances, which of course were very, we learned a lot about in Cambodia. Cambodia has major issues with this still. And there is an international bomb removal agency, mostly financed by the UK, Denmark, South Korea, to help try to clear the land of the unexploded ordinances. But the Vietnamese government spends about $44 million annually on demining and trying to clear the land. Yeah, go ahead.
Germany, the Germans have done a terrific job in terms of basically discovering and getting rid of these ordinances that every day a farmer will go out and they can have their name blown off or some other appendage in the body. It's really horrible.
Or the water buffalo, which is their main,
Yes,
source, yeah.
but we went from the very north all the way down, and I never really honestly saw Americans working on these kinds of projects. Most of them were, as I said, from Germany or Korea, but they have enormous problems that the ordinances are still there in the ground. And every day throughout the country, somebody is stepping on them and losing their head. It's really devastating.
I didn't see that, but, and of course it happens, but the thing you really do see is the Agent Orange. You hear about that a lot. And then in the museums, the War Remnants Museum, which you probably went to, is a whole area. They've taken out the fetuses. They used to have a whole, some of them are still there. But there were more when we were there in June. And
They have fetuses in beakers of embryos that were formed by Agent Orange.
and miscarried, and there's, and it's an incredible war remnant, right? But also, you would hear about it a lot. The number of disabled people, the concern, it's a very young population, and there's a lot of concern with population control. And there's a lot of difficulties with families in general in Vietnam because of just the population is getting so large so fast. But then to have this incredible expense of the Agent Orange and all of the other effects still. And when you start looking at the figures, you wonder, why on earth do they, treat us so nicely? But the other thing is that a lot of U.S. veterans have gone back. And that is what does characterize a lot of Vietnam, is that many places people will point to veterans who've come back and who work in certain villages and who bring water buffalo or who are involved in some kinds of charity works. And you see a lot of U.S. NGOs and people involved in some of these this kind of reparations work. Oh, the air pollution is terrible. In Hanoi, it seems like you're coughing for a month after you get back. By the way, their air pollution is probably clearing up really fast now. Talk to a student of mine who is the one student whose family is from Saigon, from Ho Chi Minh City, and he had some pictures, but we didn't get it in time. They have completely cleared out all of the street commerce. The schools have been closed. Everything, I don't know how many cases of coronavirus they have, but it must be a remarkable thing because he said that his cousin sent him photographs of those streets that we saw when you couldn't walk down. They're it's the pedestrians, paradise now. There's nobody cooking on the street. They banned all of the street foods, and that's quite remarkable.
World Health Organization congratulated Vietnam on its prevention program on coronavirus, which is very, very stressful. They do that stuff well.
But just the air pollution is, it's pretty terrible. They say that by 2050, all the motor scooters of 2030, I mean, all the motor scooters will be electric.
Or gone.
Or gone.
The Hanoi People's Commission announced that. Well, they made several announcements. The most radical was there will be no more gas-driven motorbikes, scooters, or cycles in Hanoi in 2030. And people went, what? you know, I gotta tell you, they might not hit that. They pull this stuff off.
But there are a lot of people who would say, oh, you watch, they might.
They might get a lot of it. And there's an
China's
experiment
very
with the
fast.
electric bikes. People don't like the electric bike. I said, where do they have electric?
They have them in Singapore, and they have a lot of accidents because people can't hear
You
them.
can't hear them until they crash into you. Except the one that crashed into me, I didn't hear it. So,
Okay, so that's the end of our show, you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
What the Vietnam government is putting into the work, the rehabilitation of land, etc., and what the US government is putting into it. Could you repeat those two figures again, please?
Oh, well, the Vietnamese government spends $44 million. Let's see, that's on the treatment, assistance, rehabilitation, vocational training, and resettlement of victims of unexplored ordinances. Okay, they spend, they put in $431 million a year for allowances for physical rehabilitation of victims of Agent Orange. And then there's this cooperation with the Japanese company. Now, in 2012, approximately 50 years after the war, the U.S. started a U.S. $43 million joint cleanup project on chemical storage areas of Vietnam. So that's really one of the ways in which, that's the figure I have on the U.S. The U.S. also does cooperate or does contribute something, but I don't have a figure on it, with Denmark, South Korea, and Japan, who are involved in Agent Orange and also refoliation.
Drop in the ocean, really.
Oh, yeah, there's not.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
US does nothing.
No.
It has never done it.
And a lot of places you go in terms of the
Some of the
buildings,
NGOs do that.
yeah, as you find, like in, I think it's in Way and in various places, you see a lot of Japanese investment into reconstructing like monuments, the Imperial Palace. Quite a few places they were Japanese investment. Yeah, John.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I found it interesting to contrast my experience last time I was in Cuba, which I know you're familiar with as well. In Cuba, you don't see the motorbikes, the numbers you see. That's unbelievable.
They would have that.
They have buses, and last year when I was in Havana, I was there during rush hour, and they really pack them into the buses.
Right, yeah.
Great. But I mean, that they have decided, obviously, to go. Some of the buses in Havana are fairly new now.
But that would be, that's a fuel thing that, Cuba doesn't have a fuel thing.
Right. The other thing was on the, is there any attempt like the Cubans are doing with old Havana to rehabilitate sections of these old cities, to make them tourist friendly? I mean, is there anything like that?
Well, you made it work. Yes,
Oh, beautiful.
yes, there are, not as extensive as they like to be, but yes, I don't know much about it.
Is there any, as far as you were able to ascertain, is there any consciousness among the people that they are in a communist country? Is there any
Yeah.
any socialist education? Should they, what defines it as a country run by the Communist Party in today's world?
Well, I mean, you know the official line of the program, right? Vietnam is building a socialist-oriented market economy. Socialist-oriented market economy. And the way that it's envisioned is, it harkens back to the new economic program under Lenin and the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union, in dire straits early in its years, started to apply various capitalist methods in order to pick production up. And they justify themselves on the basis of that. And they claim that the government still has real oversight. It still has a public sector, although we heard a top Communist Party economist talk about how the reforms, they want to cut back restrictions on the public sector. This guy was good, he was very smart. So I don't know how to add all that up. In terms of socialist education, I just talked a little bit about the monuments and the museums and so forth, but they claim to have significant amount of education around socialist theory in schools. How does it work? I don't know how it works, you know. You see, it's a real contradictory thing because obviously Vietnam has chosen, it's not the same as Cuba, because it's chosen to really back up and really invite foreign capital in. And really, and you see, you know, and it's fueled this economy amazingly. The dictum is you can't build socialism without an essential level of prosperity and resources. It's the old thing, you know, Marx and Engels have all said. The problem is that unlike Cuba, and maybe Cuba would do it if it could, but unlike Cuba, this thing is really roaring in Vietnam. And the question, I would like to think, I don't, you know, see, I want simply to dismiss it as capitalist road. I would like to think that there is some chance that this attempt at the socialist-oriented market economy, which they look forward to moving in various stages toward more fuller socialization, will have some effect.
One of the things you do see a lot is that the importance of the controlled economy, or what Andor mentioned, the thing about the motorcycle helmets. They have a system, and I believe this is the same in China, and Teresa, correct me if I'm wrong, where people are not allowed to move to the cities. Yeah. So they can move. Now, the vast majority of people are on the countryside still. Now, they said 80% when we were there, but I just saw a figure that said 65%, so I don't know. And so these cities are booming, and the growth is incredible, and the cities are rimmed by these industrial zones, these economic industrial zones where you'll find Canon, Samsung, and Mitsubishi, all these companies there. But if you move to take a job in the industrial zone or in the city, you cannot move your social welfare, your social security, you can't get your health care, and you can't get your education. So that means that a lot of people will move, young people, and even young families. A mother, and oftentimes it's a woman alone, she'll move and she'll leave her children in the countryside with the parents. So this is an issue that it's very problematic, and we didn't get a very good answer to how this was going to ever work out. And then the other problem is that a lot of the people on the countryside, or young people on the countryside, don't want to stay in the countryside. They want to move to, the cities, and we know that cities are very attractive in general for the whole world population moving to cities. But on the one hand, I understood very well what Vietnam was trying to do because, I work on Latin America, and you see that Mexico City and Rio and Sao Paulo, these places are totally unmanageable because of the vast number of people who moved in and who live in shantytown. So they don't want that. They don't have that. They don't have massive, like we have the favelas in Rio and places. But it's hidden, So somebody over there, yeah.
Could you remind me of the name of the person, the man who's the author?
Oh, yeah, right here. I brought the book.
No, please.
If you read no book, this is the greatest one.
Thank you.
It's called Nothing Ever Dies, and it's Vietnam in the Memory of War.
It's pretty good.
And the thing is, it's essays, and our students love the book too. And one of the things, the first chapter is, he says, this is a book on war, memory, and identity. It proceeds from the idea that all wars are fought twice. The first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory. And then it goes on from there. And it's really, it's a great book.
you talked about another author, I think it was a different author, talking about the two failed revolutions.
Oh, that's second.
No, that's second.
Yeah. That's
That's not what he said. He said he sees himself as a legacy of two revolutions. He said something like, we've gone off track, we haven't fulfilled.
I think you've given a very good basis for understanding how seriously the Vietnamese revolution has been disappointing.
Yeah, in certain ways. But
Well,
the thing that was a problem for me was the basic services. And this goes back to, looking at Cuba. Like, medical care is not that great, and they don't have free medical care.
Right.
And they don't, it's not free, it's expensive, it's a problem. Education is expensive. They have to pay for it. And so you think, oh, well, if you're going to put into a kind of, social welfare economy, these are the first things, education, healthcare. But that didn't happen there. And the other thing is the pollution issue. There's no public transportation, or very little.
Well, 12% are buses in Hamburg. That's,
You
and they're
know-
supposed to be very good.
Yeah, but when you go to New York City, you can't get down the street during certain times because there's so many buses, right? There's buses and then there's a subway
Right next
system.
door to China, but
Yeah, and well, we went to a factory actually where they do make these buses there too. But they just have cars and motorcycles, and so that's a hard place to make the transition into what you need to do, which is public
But let me
transportation.
just throw in a statistic that's really interesting. 49 million
10 minutes.
motorbikes, how many
Start to wrap
cars?
up and make sure everyone's out.
And there's a lot of cars in Vietnam compared to only 2 million cars.
We have to start meeting because we have an agreement that we will stop at 1:15. And there's a BNP email, sign up for the email list. Sign up.